What should have been a simple family dinner turned into the catalyst for business justice and culinary revolution that I never anticipated. Standing in Victoria Reynolds' opulent dining room, forced to serve appetizers to her socialite friends, while being introduced as the help, I realized I had a choice: to swallow this humiliation silently, or to finally confront the classist behavior I'd been tolerating for months. Sometimes life serves up the perfect opportunity for truth when you least expect it. And my mother-in-law's elaborate dinner party would set in motion events that would change not just my relationship with my husband's family, but the entire conversation about respect and recognition in the restaurant industry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I've always prided myself on reading people accurately. As the founder and CEO of Harvest Table Restaurants, a rapidly growing farm-to-table chain with locations in 7 states, my success depended on understanding what customers wanted before they could articulate it themselves. My parents, Miguel and Sofia Ramirez, had taught me through their immigrant journey that success came from equal parts intuition and resilience. Always watch how people treat those they think can't help them. Lucia, my father would say, that's when you see their true character. Ironic then how completely I'd misread the Reynolds family dynamics until that crisp October evening, 2 months before my wedding to their son James. The day had started perfectly. I'd spent the morning at our newest Harvest Table location, finalizing the seasonal menu changes with our executive chef. The restaurant group that had begun as a single cafe financed with my life savings had blossomed into a respected culinary brand known for sustainable practices and living wages for all staff. Though the growth had been substantial, I'd kept my ownership relatively private, not out of secrecy, but because I believed the food and experience should speak for itself. James had called while I was approving the final dessert options. Mom's having some friends over tonight for dinner. Can you come early? She's stressed about making a good impression on the Huntingtons. I'd agreed readily, assuming Victoria might want my opinion on the menu or wine pairings. After 3 years of dating her son, I'd made numerous attempts to connect with Victoria over our shared love of entertaining, though my future mother-in-law had remained coolly distant. Mrs. Reynolds, I called, stepping into the gleaming marble foyer of the family's suburban mansion. Victoria, I'm here to help with dinner. The house seemed unusually quiet for pre-dinner preparations. Victoria Reynolds had insisted on hosting this intimate gathering herself, declining James's suggestion to have it catered. Proper society women cook for their important guests, she'd sniffed. Her reluctance to acknowledge my expertise had become a pattern I'd chosen to overlook for James's sake. Hello? I called again, my voice echoing through the cavernous space. She's in the kitchen having a meltdown, came Olivia's voice as James's younger sister descended the staircase. The salmon souffle collapsed, and the Huntingtons will be here in an hour. Olivia and I shared a conspiratorial smile. Victoria's perfectionism and insistence on executing elaborate dishes beyond her skill level had become a private joke between us. I'll see if I can help salvage dinner, I said, heading toward the kitchen. Lucia, Olivia called after me, something in her voice making me turn. I think you should know that Mom's been telling everyone you're the catering staff tonight. I overheard her on the phone with Mrs. Huntington saying she'd hired someone to manage service. My stomach tightened, but I forced a smile. Your mother has her peculiarities. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I immediately sensed the disaster unfolding. Victoria stood, amidst culinary chaos, a fallen souffle, sauce curdling on the stove, and an underdone roast sitting forlornly on the counter. The elaborate menu she'd planned was clearly beyond her capabilities, yet her pride had prevented her from accepting help until crisis point. Victoria, I said gently, I see dinner's hit a rough patch. Can I help? She turned, impeccably dressed in designer evening wear, not a blonde highlight out of place despite the kitchen catastrophe surrounding her. Her expression shifted from panic to calculated relief as she assessed me in my simple wrap dress and practical flats. "Oh, Lucia, thank goodness. You're early." Her voice carried the clipped precision of old money. "The situation is rather dire, I'm afraid. These recipes are quite exacting, and the timing got away from me." She gestured vaguely at the kitchen disaster. "Since you have experience with restaurant work, perhaps you could step in and help salvage the evening." The subtle emphasis on restaurant work, as if my executive role was equivalent to bussing tables, wasn't lost on me, but I'd grown accustomed to Victoria's dismissive characterizations of my career. James had tried repeatedly to correct his mother's deliberate misunderstanding of my position, but Victoria remained selectively ignorant about my actual accomplishments. "I'd be happy to help," I replied, already rolling up my sleeves and assessing what could be saved. "The soufflé is beyond rescue, but we can pivot to a smoked salmon tartare. The sauce can be strained and reduced to concentrate the flavors, and the roast just needs more time." Victoria watched with poorly disguised amazement as I quickly reorganized her dinner service, creating elegant solutions from her culinary failures. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose those years working in restaurants taught you something useful after all." She straightened her designer dress. "I should get ready to greet the guests. The staff entrance is through the mudroom. You can use that when serving so you don't disturb the dinner conversation." The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications hit me. Victoria wasn't asking for help with cooking, she was relegating me to serving staff for the evening, intentionally hiding my relationship to the family from her prestigious guests. "I'm not catering staff, Victoria. I'm your son's fiancé," I said evenly. She looked momentarily flustered before regaining her composure. "Of course, dear, but tonight is crucial for James's networking. The Huntingtons have connections to every major law firm in the Northeast. This dinner could determine his entire partnership track." She lowered her voice confidentially. "And between us, they're rather traditional about social roles. They wouldn't understand someone of your background, being part of the intimate dinner circle rather than facilitating it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something inside me went very still and cold. This wasn't just about dinner service. This was the culmination of 1,000 small slights. Victoria introducing me as James's friend from the city at family functions. The pointed questions about when I would settle into something more suitable than restaurant work. The constant reminders of the Reynolds family's generations of privilege compared to my immigrant parents' small grocery business. "Where exactly did you get these scallops?" I asked, my professional mind already cataloging the subpar ingredients Victoria had purchased. "They're hardly fresh." "Seafood Palace on Wilmington Street," she said dismissively. "They're perfectly adequate and quite expensive." I bit back a laugh. Seafood Palace was notorious among restaurateurs for passing off frozen product as fresh and charging premium prices. The irony was too perfect. Victoria had been swindled because she valued prestige over quality, exactly the approach she took to human relationships. "These won't do," I said matter-of-factly. "Not if you want to impress the Huntingtons." I pulled out my phone. "Let me make a call." Victoria watched with poorly concealed irritation as I dialed. "Marcus, it's Lucia. I need an emergency delivery to 478 Lakeview Terrace. The full premium seafood selection, enough for 8, and whatever seasonal truffle you have in stock. Yes, it's a personal favor. Thank you." Before Victoria could protest, I was already reconstructing her menu into something salvageable. Years of resolving kitchen crises had made me efficient in disaster recovery. "Who is Marcus?" she finally asked, suspicion clouding her features. "Our seafood supplier," I replied simply, not elaborating that Marcus personally handled sourcing. For all 7 Harvest Table restaurants, and wouldn't normally make deliveries himself for anyone except his most valued client. Your restaurant must do decent business if they make personal deliveries, she said, the backhanded compliment transparent. I suppose casual dining does appeal to certain demographics. I let the comment slide, focusing instead on preparing the kitchen for Marcus's imminent arrival. Within 20 minutes, he appeared at the service entrance, carrying premium seafood and seasonal ingredients that would have cost Victoria triple her original grocery bill. The best we have, Ms. Ramirez, he said respectfully. Chef Eduardo suggested including the black truffles from this morning's shipment. He said you'd know how to feature them. Victoria's expression shifted subtly as she observed our interaction. You must be a valued customer, she remarked after Marcus left, reevaluating me slightly but still missing the obvious deference in his manner. I believe in building relationships, not just transactions, I replied, already transforming the ordinary ingredients into extraordinary dishes. My phone buzzed with a text from James. Stuck in traffic? Will be late. How's it going with Mom? I answered simply, interesting evening developing. Your mother has asked me to serve dinner to the Huntingtons. His immediate call went to voicemail as Victoria announced, they're here. Her panic at the sound of the doorbell made it clear there was no time for clarifications or objections. Please, Lucia, she said, her voice dropping to a urgent whisper. James's future depends on this dinner. Just help me get through tonight, and we can sort out any misunderstandings later. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Not for Victoria's sake, but for James, who had always been caught between his mother's expectations and his support for my ambitions. I'll ensure dinner is perfect, I promised, but we will definitely discuss this later. Victoria's relief was palpable as she hurried to greet her guests, leaving me alone in the kitchen with a simmering sense of indignation and a determination to execute a flawless meal despite the circumstances. As I worked, transforming Victoria's mediocre ingredients into sophisticated dishes with the premium additions Marcus had delivered, I heard the murmur of introductions and cocktail conversation from the living room. The help is preparing dinner, Victoria's voice carried clearly during a momentary lull. She's quite competent with simple fare, though I've had to guide the menu toward something more refined for tonight. The casual dismissal stung, but I channeled my frustration into the food, creating dishes that would have commanded hundreds of dollars at any fine dining establishment. By the time Victoria appeared to check on dinner progress, I had orchestrated a meal that would outshine any previous entertainment in her home. My goodness, she said, genuine surprise in her voice as she surveyed the elegant presentations. This looks quite professional. It should, I replied evenly. This is what I do. Victoria frowned slightly at my tone but was prevented from responding by the timer indicating the main course was ready. The guests are seated, she said. You can begin serving the first course. For a moment, I considered refusing, walking out and leaving Victoria to explain to her prestigious guests why dinner wouldn't be arriving. But professional pride and curiosity about how far this charade would go kept me in place. I'd spent my career proving myself in kitchens and boardrooms dominated by people who underestimated me. Victoria Reynolds was just one more person who needed education about appearances versus reality. Of course, I said, arranging the starter plates with precision. I'll ensure everything is perfect. What followed was one of the most surreal experiences of my professional life. I, who had been featured in Culinary Leader magazine as Restaurateur of the Year just 3 months earlier, served each course to Victoria's oblivious guests while she held court at the head of the table. The Huntingtons, Maxwell, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, and his wife Eleanor, complimented each dish effusively. "Victoria, you've outdone yourself," Eleanor exclaimed over the truffle-infused risotto. "This rivals anything we've had at Harvest Table, and you know how difficult reservations are at their locations." I nearly dropped the serving platter. "Harvest Table?" Victoria replied, momentarily flustered. Yes, I've heard it's quite popular. Popular understates it, Maxwell Huntington corrected. Their approach to sustainable fine dining has revolutionized the industry. We had the pleasure of meeting their founder at a charity event last year. Brilliant young woman with an exceptional vision for culinary ethics. Lucia something. Hispanic name, I believe. Ramirez, I supplied automatically as I served the wine pairing. Yes, that's it, Eleanor brightened. Lucia Ramirez. Do you know she started with a single cafe and built it into the most respected new restaurant group in the region? And she's done it while ensuring living wages for staff and sustainable sourcing. Quite remarkable. Victoria's complexion had paled notably. How interesting, she managed, shooting me a warning glance. I wasn't aware you were familiar with that establishment. We're investors, actually, Maxwell said proudly. When our firm's venture capital division identified Harvest Table as a potential opportunity, I insisted on meeting Ms. Ramirez personally. Her business acumen equals her culinary vision. Our return has been exceptional, both financially and ethically. I stood frozen by the serving cart, watching Victoria's carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. The help she'd been dismissing to impress the Huntingtons was actually someone they admired and had financially backed. The irony was almost too perfect. More wine, Mrs. Huntington? I offered, breaking the awkward silence that had descended on Victoria. Yes, thank you. Eleanor paused, studying my face more carefully. You know, you look remarkably familiar. Before I could respond, the front door opened and James's voice called out, Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare. He appeared. In the dining room doorway, his expression shifting from apologetic to confused as he took in the scene. Me standing with a wine bottle while his mother looked increasingly distressed. Lucia, he questioned, what are you doing serving wine? Your mother needed help with dinner, I replied carefully. I've been assisting with service. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment and anger. Mom, what's going on here? Victoria attempted recovery with practiced social grace. James, darling, Lucia was kind enough to help in the kitchen when dinner preparations became challenging. The Huntingtons were just commenting on how exceptional the food is. Indeed, Maxwell Huntington said, still oblivious to the undercurrents. It rivals the best restaurants in the city. Victoria, you've been holding out on us regarding your culinary talents. James looked from his mother to me, comprehension and horror dawning on his face. Mom, please tell me you didn't ask my fiancé, the founder and CEO of Harvest Table Restaurants, to pretend to be catering staff at your dinner party. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor Huntington's wine glass froze halfway to her lips as she stared at me with widening recognition. You're Lucia Ramirez? The Lucia Ramirez? Victoria's carefully constructed social performance collapsed entirely. There's been a misunderstanding, she attempted weakly. No misunderstanding, Mrs. Reynolds, I said calmly, placing the wine bottle on the table. You needed help with dinner and I provided it, though I do believe proper introductions are overdue. I extended my hand to the Huntingtons. Lucia Ramirez, founder and CEO of Harvest Table Restaurant Group. It's a pleasure to meet you properly. Thank you for your investment in our mission. Maxwell Huntington recovered first, rising to shake my hand with newfound respect. The pleasure is entirely ours, Ms. Ramirez, though I confess I'm rather confused about the circumstances of this evening. As am I, James said, his voice tight with controlled anger as he looked at his mother. Perhaps my mother would care to explain why my fiancé is serving dinner, rather than joining us at the table. Victoria's perfect features arranged themselves into a practiced look of innocence. James, don't be dramatic. Lucia offered to help when the original menu didn't come together as planned. It seemed sensible given her expertise. Mom, stop, James interrupted. I saw your text to me this morning. You specifically said you were hiring serving staff for tonight. You deliberately misrepresented Lucia's role to our guests. Victoria's facade cracked slightly. The Huntingtons have certain expectations about the kind of family you'd marry into. I was simply trying to present our best foot forward for your career prospects. By hiding who Lucia actually is? James challenged. By pretending my successful, brilliant fiancé is the help because you're embarrassed by her immigrant background and self-made success? Something inside me went very still as I watched this family dynamic I'd been navigating for years, finally exposed in its raw truth. Victoria Reynolds wasn't just snobbish or traditional, she was deliberately erasing my identity and accomplishments because they didn't fit her narrative of suitable achievements. The restaurant work she dismissed so casually had built a multi-million-dollar business that employed hundreds and had changed culinary practices across the region. I think, I said quietly but clearly, that this dinner party has revealed more than just Victoria's limited culinary abilities. It's exposed a pattern of behavior that can no longer be ignored or excused. Eleanor Huntington, reading the room with the precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes social situations, stood gracefully. Maxwell, I believe we should give the family some privacy to discuss these matters. She turned to me with genuine warmth. Ms. Ramirez, dinner was exceptional, as I would expect from someone of your talents. Perhaps we could continue our conversation about sustainable restaurant practices at a more appropriate time? As the Huntingtons made their diplomatic exit, Victoria remained frozen at the head of the table, her social humiliation complete. James moved to stand beside me, his support unequivocal despite his obvious distress at his mother's behavior. I've overlooked a lot, Victoria, I said once we were alone. The accidental mispronunciations of my name at family gatherings, the comments about my exotic appearance, the constant reminders that the Reynolds family has been in this country for generations while my parents arrived with nothing. But I won't be erased or diminished any longer, especially not in service to your outdated notions of social standing. Victoria finally found her voice. You don't understand the social complexities of our world, Lucia. Certain backgrounds and occupations carry weight that your experience simply doesn't provide. I was protecting James's prospects. By hiding the fact that his fiancée has built a more successful business than anyone in your social circle? James interjected. Mom, do you realize the Huntingtons are investors in Lucia's company? That she employs more people than Dad's entire law firm? That she was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce? Victoria's expression revealed that she had indeed not known, or had deliberately chosen to ignore, the full extent of my professional accomplishments. Restaurant work is still service industry, she said defensively, clinging to her worldview. It's not the same as proper professional achievements. I studied Victoria carefully, seeing beyond her perfect exterior to the insecurity beneath. Her identity was so thoroughly wrapped in social status and traditional markers of success that she couldn't recognize innovation or entrepreneurship unless it came in familiar packaging. What exactly constitutes proper achievement in your view, Victoria? I asked. Is it inherited wealth like yours? Or perhaps careers that have existed for centuries? Does success only count if it follows paths you recognize? James squeezed my hand, his support unwavering. Mom, Lucia has created something extraordinary from nothing. If you can't respect that, the problem lies with your values, not her accomplishments. Victoria's face flushed with the rare experience of direct confrontation. You're being naive, James. The world still operates on certain principles of social standing. The Huntingtons may find Lucia's business interesting as an investment, but they wouldn't consider her an equal in their social circle. Actually, I countered, Eleanor Huntington personally invited me to join the board of the Arts Foundation last month. I've been hesitant to accept because of the time commitment, not because of any question about my belonging. This revelation seemed to genuinely shock Victoria. Her worldview, that old money and traditional professional paths were the only routes to social acceptance, was crumbling before her eyes. The help she had so casually dismissed had been welcomed into circles she herself had spent decades trying to fully penetrate. "I think," James said finally, "that we need to reevaluate a lot of assumptions, starting with the dynamics of this family and how we treat each other." He turned to me. "I'm so sorry, Lucia. I knew Mom had traditional views, but I never imagined she would deliberately humiliate you like this." "I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone," Victoria protested, though her conviction had weakened considerably. "I was simply maintaining appropriate social boundaries." "By lying to your guests and demeaning your future daughter-in-law?" I asked. "Those aren't boundaries, Victoria. That's prejudice dressed up as propriety." As I gathered my things to leave, Victoria made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. "Where are you going? We need to discuss how to handle this with the Huntingtons. Their influence in James's firm is significant." The statement revealed everything about Victoria's priorities: not repairing the damage to our relationship, but managing the social fallout. "I'm going home," I replied calmly. "And as for the Huntingtons, I'll be meeting with them next week anyway to discuss expanding their investment in Harvest Table's new sustainable farming initiative. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about." James followed me to the door, distress evident in every line of his body. "I'll come with you. We need to talk about this." "Not tonight," I said gently. "You need to have a conversation with your mother that's long overdue, and I need space to think about what this means for us moving forward." As I drove away from the Reynolds estate, the implications of the evening settled heavily around me. What had begun as a simple dinner had exposed fundamental values that diverged more sharply than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge. The question wasn't just whether Victoria could respect me, but whether James and I could build a life together with such different understandings of worth and accomplishment. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Just heard what happened. Mom's in full damage control mode with Dad. James is standing his ground for once. Are you okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question. The professional in me had executed a flawless dinner under adverse conditions. The entrepreneur in me had witnessed firsthand how my accomplishments were perceived by people like the Huntingtons versus people like Victoria. And the woman in me had been forced to confront whether I was willing to marry into a family where I might always be seen as somehow less than, despite all evidence to the contrary. One thing was certain: Victoria Reynolds' attempt to relegate me to serving staff had backfired spectacularly. In trying to diminish me, she had created the perfect conditions for the truth to emerge in ways that could no longer be ignored or explained away. The pretense had been stripped away, leaving raw reality that would forever change my relationship with the Reynolds family. What I didn't yet know was whether that change would strengthen my future with James or end it entirely. As I pulled into the driveway of my own home, a restored farmhouse that had been my first major purchase after Harvest Table's initial success, I realized tonight had served up a truth that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Sometimes the most important ingredients in life's recipes are the ones that were there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. Alex's downtown loft had become a strategy headquarters by the time morning light filtered through the industrial windows. Spread across his reclaimed wood dining table were press clippings, financial reports, and the menu I'd created from Victoria's kitchen disaster, now annotated with pricing for a potential new offering at Harvest Table's flagship location. "You turned a humiliating setup into a 5-star dining experience," Alex remarked, reviewing my hastily captured photos of last night's dishes. As my best friend since culinary school and Harvest Table's creative director, he understood better than anyone how the evening represented everything I'd fought against in my career. The truffle risotto alone would sell for $45 on our menu. Preparing and sharing this story took significant effort, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The food was never the issue, I said, scrolling through the dozens of missed calls and messages from James that had accumulated overnight. After leaving Victoria's dinner party, I'd driven straight to Alex's loft, too raw and angry to return to the home I shared with James. The boundary had been necessary. I needed space to process what had happened without James's well-intentioned but complicated presence. The Huntingtons' reaction is the real irony, Sofia commented, arranging fresh-baked pastries she'd brought from her cafe. My younger sister had arrived at dawn, summoned by our family's unfailing crisis radar. Victoria. Tried to impress them by hiding you, only to discover they respect you more than her. I studied the email that had arrived from Eleanor Huntington at 6:17 a.m., a gracious message expressing admiration for my handling of the awkward circumstances and reiterating her interest in both deepening their investment in Harvest Table and having me join the Arts Foundation board. Victoria doesn't understand the world has changed, I reflected. She still believes success only counts if it follows traditional paths she recognizes: law, medicine, finance. Anything outside that framework is somehow lesser, especially if it involves service or food. Classism wrapped in country club manners, Alex said bluntly, his own working-class background making him particularly sensitive to such distinctions. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And what does this mean for you and James? My phone lit up with James's name, his 20th call since last night. This time, I answered. Lucia, thank God. His voice carried equal measures of relief and distress. I've been worried sick. Where are you? Are you okay? I'm at Alex's, I replied, keeping my tone measured. I needed space to think. I understand, he said quickly. What Mom did was unforgivable. Dad and I confronted her for hours after you left. I've never seen him so angry with her. Robert Reynolds, James's father, had always been the more approachable of his parents, a corporate attorney whose quiet dignity contrasted with Victoria's social maneuvering. Though he'd never openly challenged his wife's behavior toward me, I'd sensed his discomfort with her thinly veiled elitism. And what was the outcome of this confrontation? I asked, not ready to let go of my anger despite James's obvious distress. Mom's been... He hesitated, searching for words. Shaken. The Huntingtons called this morning and declined her invitation to the charity gala next month. Apparently, they've chosen to attend the Harvest Table Foundation fundraiser instead. The information surprised me. The Reynolds-hosted charity gala was Victoria's crowning social achievement each year, a carefully orchestrated display of her influence and connections. For the Huntingtons to decline was a significant social rebuke. That wasn't my doing, I said carefully. I never asked them to take sides. They made their choice based on what they witnessed, James replied. And they're not alone. 2 other couples who were going to attend Mom's gala have inquired about your foundation event. Instead, word is spreading about what happened. I closed my eyes briefly, processing this development. The Harvest Table Foundation had been established last year to support sustainable farming practices and culinary education for underprivileged youth, causes deeply personal to me after watching my immigrant parents struggle to establish their grocery business while maintaining their culinary heritage. The upcoming fundraiser was our first major event, and while I'd wanted it to succeed, I'd never intended it to come at Victoria's expense. Lucia, James continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Mom wants to meet with you, to apologize. I nearly dropped the phone. Victoria Reynolds wants to apologize? Voluntarily? Well, Dad and I made it clear there wasn't much alternative. If she wants any relationship with us going forward. But yes, she's requested a meeting. I considered the offer carefully. What exactly does she hope to accomplish with this apology? Honestly, damage control, at least initially, James admitted with refreshing candor. But I think beneath that, there's been a genuine shock to her system. The Huntingtons were her social North Star. Learning they respect you, invest in your company, want you on their boards, has forced her to question a lot of assumptions. Sophia, who had been unabashedly eavesdropping, scribbled a note and pushed it toward me. Make her come to you. Home field advantage. Tell Victoria I'll meet with her, I decided. At my restaurant, the original Harvest Table Cafe where I started. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. After a moment's hesitation, James agreed. I'll let her know. And Lucia, I'm so sorry, not just for last night, but for every time I've made excuses for her behavior instead of confronting it directly. His apology was sincere, but it raised larger questions that couldn't be resolved in a single phone call. We have a lot to discuss about what this means for us, James. But first, I need to have this conversation with your mother. After ending the call, I turned to find Alex and Sophia watching me with matching expressions of concern. Are you sure meeting with Victoria is wise? Alex asked. This woman deliberately humiliated you in front of people she was trying to impress. And failed spectacularly, Sophia pointed out, which means she's either genuinely remorseful or desperately scrambling to salvage her social standing. Probably both, I acknowledged. But either way, I need to address this directly. Not just for my relationship with James, but for myself. I've spent too long accommodating Victoria's traditional values, while she's dismissed everything I've built. The truth was, Victoria's treatment at the dinner party had crystallized patterns I'd been tolerating since beginning my relationship with James. The subtle digs about my ethnic cooking, the suggestions that I might step back from work after marriage, the constant reminders that the Reynolds family name opened doors my own achievements couldn't. I'd rationalized her behavior as generational differences or cultural misunderstandings, never forcing a direct confrontation that might damage James's relationship with his parents. But serving dinner to Victoria's friends, being literally relegated to staff status despite being the successful entrepreneur in the room, had stripped away those rationalizations, revealing the raw classism and prejudice beneath Victoria's polished manners. If you're meeting Victoria at the cafe, we need to prepare, Sophia said decisively, shifting into the protective mode she'd perfected since childhood. The original Harvest Table holds all your memories and milestones. It represents everything. You've built that she's dismissed. She needs to feel that the moment she walks in. I smiled at my sister's fierce loyalty. What exactly are you suggesting? A strategic reminder of exactly who you are and what you've accomplished, Alex interjected, catching Sophia's drift immediately. Not out of pettiness, but because Victoria needs to confront the reality she's been avoiding. By the time I arrived at the original Harvest Table Cafe the following morning, Sophia and Alex had transformed the space into a subtle but powerful testament to my journey. The cafe had been closed to regular customers for private event preparation, though the event was Victoria's long-overdue education. The walls, normally decorated with local farm photographs, now displayed framed magazine covers and articles chronicling Harvest Table's growth, from local business features to my recent spread in Culinary Leader. A timeline along one wall traced the restaurant group's expansion from this single struggling cafe to 7 acclaimed locations. In the center of the main table sat a leather-bound portfolio containing the complete financial prospectus that had attracted the Huntingtons' investment group. Isn't this a bit much? I asked, surveying the transformation. It's exactly enough, Chef Eduardo replied, arriving with a tray of pastries he'd prepared specially for the meeting. As my first hire and now culinary director for all Harvest Table locations, Eduardo had witnessed every triumph and setback in building the business. This isn't about shaming Mrs. Reynolds. It's about making it impossible for her to continue, pretending you're just in the restaurant business like it's a hobby. The bell above the door chimed precisely at 10 a.m. Victoria Reynolds entered alone, her characteristic perfect appearance somewhat diminished by evident tension. She wore a conservative St. John's suit, her version of armor, and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first month's rent for this cafe. "Lucia," she acknowledged, glancing around at the displays with poorly concealed discomfort. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Would you like coffee?" I offered, deliberately echoing the service role she'd assigned me 2 nights ago, but now clearly on my own territory. "That would be... yes, thank you." I prepared her coffee personally, another deliberate choice, and gestured toward the main table where Eduardo had arranged a selection of the pastries that had first put Harvest Table on the culinary map. Once seated, Victoria seemed unsure how to begin, her usual social confidence notably absent. "James says you wanted to speak with me," I prompted finally, unwilling to make this easier for her. Victoria set down her coffee cup with a barely perceptible tremor. "I owe you an apology for my behavior at dinner. It was inappropriate and disrespectful." The words were correct, but the delivery felt rehearsed, a social obligation rather than genuine remorse. I remained silent, waiting for more. After an uncomfortable pause, Victoria continued. "The Huntingtons have made their displeasure quite clear. They've withdrawn from several commitments to our social circle." And there it was, the true motivation behind this meeting. Not remorse for hurting me, but damage control for the social consequences. "Is that what concerns you most? Victoria, the Huntingtons' reaction?" Her perfectly maintained composure cracked slightly. "Of course that concerns me. The Huntingtons' influence extends throughout our community. Their disapproval has significant implications." "For your social standing," I clarified. "Not for how your actions affected me or your son." Victoria's expression flickered with genuine confusion. "The social implications affect James too. The Huntingtons' connections at his firm could determine his partnership track." "Except the Huntingtons respect me and my business," I pointed out. "Their disappointment isn't in James. It's in discovering that his mother deliberately misrepresented his fiancée because she's embarrassed by her background and profession." Victoria flinched visibly at the direct confrontation. "That's not..." she began, then stopped herself. After a moment of internal struggle, she tried again. "I wasn't embarrassed by you precisely. I simply wanted to present James's situation in the most advantageous light. By hiding his relationship with a successful entrepreneur? By pretending I was the help?" "You don't understand the nuances of our social circle," Victoria insisted, retreating to familiar justifications. "Certain backgrounds and professions carry different weight." I gestured to the displays surrounding us. "Which part of building a multi-million-dollar business from nothing lacks weight, Victoria? The part where I employ hundreds of people? Where I've created one of the most successful restaurant groups in the region? Or is it simply that I did it as the daughter of Mexican immigrants rather than as the heir to generational wealth?" The directness of my question seemed to genuinely startle her. Throughout our relationship, I had carefully moderated my responses to her thinly veiled prejudice, choosing harmony for James's sake over confronting the underlying issues. That restraint had evaporated along with my patience. "I've always respected hard work," Victoria said defensively. "Robert and I built our position through his legal career and my community involvement." "Built upon what foundation?" I challenged. "Robert's Yale education financed by his parents? Your family connections that opened doors to the right? Social circles? You've maintained and perhaps modestly enhanced advantages you were born with. I've created something from nothing but determination and skill." Victoria's face flushed with the rare experience of direct challenge. "You make it sound as though our achievements count for nothing because we had advantages. No, I'm pointing out that you've discounted my achievements because they followed a path you don't recognize or value." You've spent 3 years referring to my restaurant work as though I'm waiting tables rather than running a business that generates more revenue than your husband's law firm. The statement hung between us, its accuracy preventing Victoria from offering her usual deflections. Her gaze drifted to the financial prospectus on the table, with its clear documentation of Harvest Table's growth trajectory and market position. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "About the scale of your business." James tried to explain, but I assumed he was exaggerating out of affection. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," I corrected gently. "It was easier to maintain your assumptions about me, about people with my background in the food industry, than to adjust your understanding of success and worth." Victoria fell silent, her internal struggle visible as she confronted biases so deeply ingrained she'd never recognized them as such. After a long moment, she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "The Huntingtons want to attend your foundation event instead of my gala," she said abruptly. "Yes," James mentioned that. "They're not the only ones. The Whitmores and Bradleys have also inquired about your event." Victoria's voice carried a note of bewilderment. "These are people I've cultivated relationships with for decades." I recognized the vulnerability beneath her statement. Victoria's social position, the carefully maintained network of influence she'd built through years of strategic entertaining and committee work, represented her life's achievement. Watching it potentially crumble over one exposed instance of prejudice was genuinely devastating to her. "I never asked anyone to choose sides, Victoria." "Perhaps not explicitly," she acknowledged. "But your success speaks for itself now that people are paying attention. The Huntingtons were effusive about your business ethics and community investments. Apparently Maxwell has been singing your praises throughout their social circle since your meeting last year." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Victoria had spent years trying to minimize my achievements to preserve her vision of social hierarchy, only to discover that the very people she sought to impress had already welcomed me into their circle on the strength of those achievements. "Where does this leave us?" I asked finally. Victoria straightened her shoulders, reassembling some of her characteristic poise. "I'd like to propose a collaboration." Of all possible responses, this was perhaps the last I'd expected. "A collaboration? Between your foundation event and my gala, a joint fundraiser that serves both our causes." Victoria's suggestion carried a calculating practicality I couldn't help but respect, despite everything. She was adapting to changing circumstances with remarkable agility. "Your sustainable farming initiatives alongside my historical preservation projects. We could maximize attendance and avoid forcing people to choose between events." The proposal was clever, a face-saving measure that would allow Victoria to maintain her social position while acknowledging my legitimate place in the community. It wasn't a genuine apology or a complete reckoning with her prejudices, but it was a pragmatic step toward coexistence. "That would require us to work together directly," I pointed out. "After what happened at dinner, are you prepared for that?" Victoria met my gaze with newfound candor. "I'm a practical woman, Lucia. Whatever my preconceptions about your background and profession, I can recognize when circumstances have changed. You have influence with people whose approval I value. I have organizational experience and connections you might find useful. A strategic alliance seems sensible." It wasn't the heartfelt reconciliation James might have hoped for, but there was something refreshingly honest about Victoria's approach. She wasn't pretending sudden enlightenment or claiming to have abandoned a lifetime of social prejudices overnight. She was acknowledging the reality of my position and proposing terms for moving forward that recognized my standing. "I appreciate your pragmatism," I said carefully. "But I need to be clear. Any collaboration would require genuine respect, not just strategic accommodation. I won't be treated as a junior partner or have my expertise dismissed because it comes from a background different from yours." Victoria considered this, weighing social necessity against ingrained habits. "I believe I can commit to that. Your business success is evident. She gestured to the displays around us, and clearly valued by people whose judgment I respect. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. Victoria's first step toward seeing me as I actually was, rather than as she had assumed me to be. There's one more thing, I added. Any collaboration between us has implications for my relationship with James. He needs to know that his mother genuinely respects the woman he's chosen, not just that she's making strategic accommodations for social convenience. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through her carefully maintained facade. James made that abundantly clear last night. He said he wouldn't proceed with a marriage where his wife wasn't fully respected by his family. She paused, vulnerability momentarily visible. I may have misjudged many things, Lucia, but I've never doubted that my son loves you completely. I don't want to lose him over my limitations. This acknowledgement, that her behavior stemmed from her own limitations rather than any deficiency in me, felt like the first authentic moment in our entire conversation. Then we have a starting point, I said, extending my hand across the table. Not just for a joint fundraiser, but for rebuilding trust. As Victoria took my offered hand, I realized we were negotiating more than event logistics. We were establishing the foundation for a family relationship that acknowledged rather than erased differences, one that might allow James and me to build a future without constant undercurrents of judgment and prejudice. Whether Victoria could truly evolve beyond her deeply ingrained biases remained to be seen. But in choosing to meet me on my territory, surrounded by evidence of the success she had dismissed, she had taken the first necessary step. And in accepting her pragmatic approach rather than demanding emotional transformation that might never come, I was choosing a path that might eventually lead to genuine understanding. Sometimes the ingredients for reconciliation aren't perfect, but with careful handling, they can still create something worth preserving. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel glittered with strategic perfection. Crystal chandeliers illuminated elegant table settings where place cards bore the combined logos of the Harvest Table Foundation and the Reynolds Historical Preservation Society, a visual representation of the unlikely alliance that had emerged from confrontation. 3 weeks of intensive planning had transformed 2 competing fundraisers into tonight's showcase event, bringing together Victoria's old money connections and my industry innovators in unprecedented collaboration. The seating chart alone deserves a Diplomatic Achievement Award, Sophia quipped, adjusting a centerpiece of sustainable, locally grown flowers. Old guard meets new entrepreneurs at every table. Was that your idea or Victoria's? Both, actually, I admitted, surveying the room with measured satisfaction. Victoria understands social engineering, and I understand community building. The combination is surprisingly effective. The journey from kitchen humiliation to co-hosting the season's most anticipated charity event had been neither straightforward nor easy. Victoria and I had established a working détente rather than warm friendship, her pragmatic acknowledgement of my professional standing matched by my recognition of her organizational expertise. We'd negotiated every aspect of tonight's event with the careful precision of peace talks between cautiously aligned nations. Mrs. Reynolds is asking for you in the staging area, Eduardo informed me, appearing with a sample of the evening's signature cocktail for my approval. Something about the auction sequence. I nodded, mentally preparing for yet another round of Victoria's suggestions that were thinly veiled attempts to maintain control. Our collaboration had revealed her genuine talent for event planning, but also her deep-seated need to assert dominance in any shared project. Each interaction required careful calibration between respecting her experience and maintaining my own authority. Victoria stood examining the display of auction items, immaculately dressed in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first restaurant lease. Her expression reflected intense concentration rather than her usual social mask. Lucia, she acknowledged, gesturing toward the display. I've been considering the presentation order. The sustainable farming initiative should be featured before the historical building restoration. The emotional impact will be stronger. I blinked, in surprise. For weeks, Victoria had insisted her preservation project take precedence in the auction sequence. This unexpected concession seemed genuinely intended to maximize fundraising impact rather than assert priority. That's a thoughtful suggestion, I replied cautiously. The farm-to-table narrative does create a compelling opening for the preservation story to follow. Victoria nodded briskly, her manner businesslike rather than warm, but notably lacking the condescension that had characterized our early interactions. The Whitmores were particularly moved by the culinary education program for disadvantaged youth. Beginning with that, we'll open checkbooks for both our causes. This pragmatic assessment reflected the evolution of our working relationship over the past 3 weeks. Victoria hadn't magically transformed into a champion of equity or abandoned her class-conscious worldview. But she had demonstrated increasing respect for my business acumen and grudging recognition of the value in my community-centered approach. "There's something else," Victoria added, uncharacteristic hesitation in her tone. "James mentioned you're considering opening an 8th harvest table location in the Westside development." "We're exploring possibilities," I confirmed, curious about her interest. The Westside project was a controversial redevelopment in a historically significant but economically challenged neighborhood, exactly the type of location Victoria typically avoided in her social planning. "The Reynolds Foundation owns the Cameron Building on Westside Boulevard," she said carefully. "It's architecturally significant but has stood vacant for years. Robert and I have been considering restoration options, but your restaurant concept might be an ideal adaptive reuse." The offer caught me completely off guard. The Cameron Building was a stunning Art Deco landmark that would perfectly showcase Harvest Table's blend of historical appreciation and contemporary innovation. More significantly, Victoria was proposing a business collaboration extending beyond our temporary fundraising alliance. "That would be an interesting possibility to explore," I managed, maintaining professional composure despite my surprise. A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's perfectly composed features. "The preservation tax credits combined with your farm-to-table concept could create a showcase project beneficial to both our interests. We could discuss terms after tonight's event." Before I could respond, James appeared in the doorway, handsome, in his tuxedo, and wearing an expression of cautious optimism as he observed our civil interaction. The week since the disastrous dinner party had been challenging for him. Caught between loyalty to me and his complex relationship with his mother, navigating the uncertain territory of our evolving family dynamics. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond simple event logistics. "Your mother was just making a very interesting business proposition," I replied, "involving the Cameron Building." James's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Mom's been protecting that building from commercial development for years. She's turned down dozens of offers. None from businesses with the right vision for the property," Victoria said briskly, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her gown. "The Harvest Table approach to historical context while serving contemporary needs is compatible with our Foundation's objectives." The careful phrasing revealed how far we'd come, and the distance still remaining. Victoria was extending a genuine professional respect that would have been unimaginable a month ago, but framing it in terms of aligned interests rather than personal reconciliation. "I should check on the catering staff," Victoria continued. "The servers need final instructions about the wine service." With a nod that acknowledged my position without quite warming to personal connection, she exited, leaving James and me in momentary privacy. "Did that just happen?" James asked, moving to take my hands in his. "Did my mother actually propose a business partnership with you?" "I believe she did," I confirmed, still processing the implications. "Though I suspect it's as much strategic as conciliatory." The Cameron Building needs a viable commercial tenant, and Harvest Table would bring prestige along with restoration. James studied my expression carefully. You don't have to accept, you know. Whatever happens between us doesn't require you to enter business arrangements with my family. His statement touched the uncertainty that had lingered between us since the night Victoria had relegated me to serving staff. While our relationship had survived the immediate crisis, fundamental questions remained about our future, about whether we could build a life together with such different family cultures and values. I know, I assured him, but it's actually an intriguing proposition on its own merits. The Cameron Building is exactly the kind of historically significant space that aligns with our brand vision. Before we could discuss further, Sofia appeared to announce that guests were beginning to arrive. The moment of personal connection gave way to professional responsibilities as we moved to our positions in the welcoming line. The next 2 hours passed in a carefully choreographed social ballet. Victoria and Robert Reynolds greeted their traditional social circle. Old money families and established professionals whose philanthropic support came with expectations of appropriate recognition. I welcomed the restaurateurs, sustainable farming, advocates, and new economy entrepreneurs who formed the backbone of Harvest Table's community. What proved most interesting was watching these worlds gradually intermingle. Maxwell Huntington engaged in animated conversation with my head of agricultural sourcing about regenerative farming practices. Victoria found herself deep in discussion with a James Beard award-winning chef about historical recipes from the region. My parents, initially hesitant about attending such a formal event, were surrounded by guests fascinated by their stories of preserving culinary traditions through their immigrant journey. Your mother seems to be holding court, James observed, nodding toward where Sofia sat with several of Victoria's most formidable social committee allies, apparently explaining the cultural significance of traditional cooking techniques with such animation that even these arbiters of social propriety were leaning forward in genuine interest. Food is the great equalizer, I replied. Everyone eats, everyone has food memories and traditions. It creates connection across boundaries that might otherwise seem impermeable. This philosophy had guided Harvest Table's development from the beginning, the belief that sharing food traditions could bridge cultural and social divides. Watching it happen in this rarefied ballroom, among people who typically defined themselves by exclusivity rather than connection, felt like validation of everything I'd worked to build. The dinner service began, a carefully crafted menu that showcased Harvest Table's commitment to local sourcing while meeting the traditional expectations of Victoria's social circle. Each course told a story of regional heritage and contemporary innovation, accompanied by wines selected to complement both the food and the cultural narrative. As the main course was served, Victoria rose to address the gathered guests. Her poise was flawless as always, but something in her demeanor had shifted subtly since our first meeting at the original Harvest Table Cafe. Tonight represents more than the joining of two worthy causes, she began, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. It demonstrates how seemingly different approaches to community stewardship can complement and strengthen each other. She gestured toward me with unexpected graciousness. When Lucia Ramirez and I began discussing this collaboration, we discovered that historical preservation and sustainable innovation are not opposing values, but complementary ones. Respecting heritage while embracing progress creates something more valuable than either approach could achieve alone. The diplomatic phrasing transformed our hard-won compromise into a visionary partnership, Victoria's gift for social narrative recasting weeks of careful negotiation as inspired collaboration. Yet beneath the polished presentation, I detected something genuinely reflective in her manner. I've spent decades working to preserve our community's architectural heritage, Victoria continued. Lucia has spent years building a business that honors culinary traditions while creating new opportunities. We've approached community from different directions, but tonight demonstrates the power of finding common ground. When my turn came, To speak, I acknowledged the journey that had brought us to this unlikely alliance without referencing the specific catalyst of my kitchen humiliation. Meaningful partnerships often emerge from unexpected beginnings, I noted, meeting Victoria's gaze briefly. The most innovative solutions frequently arise when different perspectives converge around shared values. The auction that followed exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Victoria's social circle competed with my industry colleagues to support both the culinary education initiative and the historical preservation projects. The complimentary presentations we'd carefully crafted inspiring generous bidding from both communities. "We've raised nearly double our original goal," James whispered as the final item closed to enthusiastic applause. "This is incredible." "Strategic alignment of interests," I replied, echoing Victoria's pragmatic approach. Both communities feeling valued while discovering connection to causes they might otherwise have overlooked. As the formal program concluded and guests moved to the networking reception, I found myself momentarily alone, observing the unexpected social alchemy taking place around the room. Chef Eduardo was deep in conversation with Robert Reynolds about historical recipes discovered in the archives of buildings the Reynolds Foundation had preserved. My father had somehow engaged Victoria's Garden Club president in a passionate discussion about heritage vegetable varieties his parents had brought from Mexico. "Quite a transformation from serving canapés in my kitchen," Victoria's voice came from behind me, her tone balanced between acknowledgement and lingering discomfort, with direct reference to that evening. I turned to face her, recognizing the effort this direct approach represented. "Different circumstances entirely." Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "I've been reflecting on something you said during our meeting, at your restaurant, about creating something from nothing versus maintaining advantages one was born with." The statement surprised me. I'd assumed Victoria had simply filed away our confrontational conversation rather than genuinely engaging with its substance. "My grandparents lost everything in the financial crash of 1929, she continued, revealing personal history she'd never previously shared. "My father rebuilt through relentless social climbing and strategic marriages. The Reynolds name and position weren't inherited wealth. They were carefully constructed through calculated alliances and appearances." This glimpse into the foundations of Victoria's worldview offered unexpected context for her behavior. Her rigid adherence to social hierarchy wasn't simply snobbery, but a protective mechanism born of generational insecurity. "The world you've navigated and the one I've built are different," I acknowledged, "but both require their own kind of resilience." Victoria's perfectly maintained composure softened fractionally. "James says your parents arrived in this country with nothing but their culinary knowledge and work ethic." "And each other," I added. "Community has always been as important as capital in building our success." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, not wholesale transformation, but a moment of genuine consideration. "The Cameron Building offer stands," she said, returning to more comfortable territory of practical arrangements. "The Reynolds Foundation Board approved the concept this morning, contingent on suitable terms. I'll have my team review the possibilities," I promised. "It could be an excellent showcase for both our approaches to community investment." As Victoria was called away to speak with departing donors, James appeared at my side, slipping his arm around my waist with affectionate support. "That looked like an actual conversation rather than a strategic negotiation," he observed cautiously. "Progress?" "Small steps," I acknowledged. "Your mother just shared more about her family history in 2 minutes than in the previous 3 years combined." James's expression reflected surprise mingled with hope. "Mom doesn't talk about her grandparents' financial collapse with anyone. That's significant." "It contextualizes some of her behavior," I said carefully. "It doesn't excuse the dinner party incident, but it helps me understand her perspective better." The evening continued to unfold with unexpected moments of connection across previously rigid social boundaries. Maxwell Huntington introduced my mother to the dean of the Culinary Institute, leading to an animated discussion about establishing a scholarship program for first-generation immigrant students. Robert Reynolds found common ground with my sustainable farming director over shared concerns about water conservation. As the event drew to a close, Victoria approached with Eleanor Huntington, the two women presenting a united social front that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. "Eleanor has a proposition that might interest you," Victoria said, making the introduction with surprising collegiality. "We've been discussing the potential for expanding your culinary education program to include a historical component," Eleanor explained, connecting traditional cooking methods with the architectural spaces where they developed. The Huntington Foundation could provide matching funds if the Reynolds preservation work and Harvest Table's education initiative were formally aligned. The proposal represented exactly the kind of synergy I'd hoped might emerge from tonight's event. Unexpected alliances formed across traditional boundaries, creating opportunities that neither community could have developed independently. "That sounds like an exciting possibility to explore," I replied, genuinely intrigued by the concept. "Victoria has agreed to co-chair the development committee," Eleanor added, with a significant glance toward my future mother-in-law. "Her historical expertise combined with your culinary innovation could create something truly distinctive." After the Huntingtons departed, I turned to Victoria with undisguised surprise. "Co-chair? That's quite a commitment to a collaborative approach." Victoria adjusted her diamond bracelet with characteristic precision. "The concept has merit from both philanthropic and social perspectives, and as tonight has demonstrated, our complementary networks create powerful fundraising potential." The practical framing was pure Victoria, strategic rather than sentimental, but represented genuine evolution nonetheless. From dismissing me as unsuitable help to acknowledging the value of partnership required significant reassessment of her entrenched worldview. "Besides," she added with unexpected candor, "James made it abundantly clear that my relationship with his future wife would determine my role in their lives going forward. I may be set in my ways, Lucia, but I'm not foolish enough to lose my son over pride." This acknowledgement, that maintaining her relationship with James required genuine respect for me, felt like the most honest statement Victoria had ever made about our complicated dynamic. "He shouldn't be forced to choose," I said carefully. "No," Victoria agreed, "which is why we need to establish a functional relationship, whatever our different perspectives." As the last guests departed and the event team began breakdown, I found myself standing with James in the now quiet ballroom, reflecting on the unexpected journey from kitchen humiliation to successful collaboration. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you left my mother's dinner party that night?" James asked, his arm comfortable around my shoulders. "Not remotely," I admitted. I was questioning whether our relationship could survive such fundamental differences in values and perspectives. James nodded, acknowledging the genuine crisis we'd navigated. "And now? What do you think about our future?" I considered the question thoughtfully. Victoria hadn't undergone a dramatic personality transformation or completely abandoned her class-conscious worldview. But she had demonstrated capacity for growth and adaptation that I wouldn't have believed possible a month ago. "I think we've established that differences don't have to mean division," I said carefully. "Your mother and I will never share the same perspective on everything, but we've found ways to align our different strengths toward common goals." "That sounds suspiciously like a sustainable foundation for a family," James observed with cautious optimism. "Perhaps," I agreed, "though with clear boundaries and ongoing negotiation rather than simple compromise." As we prepared to leave, Victoria approached with Robert, both looking satisfied with the evening's success. "The Cameron Building proposal," Victoria said without preamble. "I've scheduled a walkthrough for next Tuesday if you're available." The space has exceptional potential for your concept. The business-focused approach was characteristically Victoria, yet represented significant evolution from our previous dynamic. She was engaging with me as a respected professional rather than an inconvenient attachment to her son. Tuesday works, I confirmed. My design director would like to join to evaluate the spatial configuration for our kitchen requirements. Victoria nodded briskly. I'll have the historical documentation available. The original service areas had some unique features that might complement your farm-to-table approach. The exchange was cordial rather than warm, professional rather than personal, yet represented a functional relationship that would have seemed impossible the night I'd been relegated to serving her dinner guests. We had established a working respect that, while not erasing our differences, created space for collaboration and growth. As we left the hotel, James squeezed my hand gently. "Small steps," he murmured, echoing my earlier assessment. "Sometimes, that's how the most sustainable transformations happen," I replied. "Not through dramatic revelations, but through persistent incremental change." The journey from Victoria's kitchen humiliation to tonight's successful collaboration hadn't followed a neat narrative arc of conflict to resolution. It had unfolded through uncomfortable conversations, pragmatic negotiations, and grudging recognitions of complementary strengths. Neither Victoria nor I had fundamentally changed our core values or perspectives, but we had expanded our understanding of how different approaches could align towards shared goals. In the culinary world, the most interesting flavors often emerge from unexpected combinations. Ingredients that might seem incompatible until someone discovers the precise balance that transforms contrast into complement. Perhaps families worked the same way, finding harmony not through sameness, but through the careful calibration of distinct elements into something greater than its individual components. The restaurant owner and the society matriarch might never share the same worldview. But we had discovered something more valuable than agreement: the capacity to create something meaningful from our differences. The Cameron Building rose before me like a testament to perseverance. Its Art Deco facade weathered by decades, yet still commanding respect through sheer architectural dignity. Standing on the sidewalk of West Side Boulevard 6 months after that fateful dinner party, I found myself reflecting on transformations both structural and personal. The faded grandeur of this historic landmark was about to experience rebirth as Harvest Table's flagship location, while the woman who once treated me as the help now stood beside me as a business partner and, more remarkably, a genuine ally. The restoration contractors finished the ceiling medallions last week, Victoria said, unlocking the ornate brass doors with the authority of someone who had overseen countless historical renovations. They discovered original hand-painted details beneath 7 decades of paint and neglect, rather like finding hidden potential where others saw only deterioration. The metaphor wasn't subtle, but coming from Victoria Reynolds, it represented remarkable self-awareness. Our journey from antagonism to collaboration had unfolded alongside the building's transformation, both requiring patience, clear-eyed assessment of damage, and commitment to revealing something valuable beneath years of accumulated barriers. Inside, sunlight streamed through newly restored windows, illuminating a space that seamlessly blended historical preservation with contemporary purpose. The original marble-topped service counters had been repurposed as our bar area. Vintage. Light fixtures hung above modern sustainable materials. The restaurant embodied exactly the synthesis Victoria and I had discovered was possible, respecting heritage while embracing innovation. Chef Eduardo's been testing the kitchen ventilation systems all week, I told Victoria, leading her toward what had once been the building's central courtyard, now transformed into our open kitchen and chef's table area. The sustainable energy modifications you suggested actually improved the airflow while maintaining the architectural integrity. Victoria nodded with professional satisfaction. The tax credits for the energy upgrades offset the additional restoration costs. The financial and historical benefits aligned perfectly. This pragmatic approach to our partnership had proven surprisingly effective. Victoria's expertise in historical preservation complemented my innovation in culinary sustainability. Her connections with city planning officials had expedited permits that typically bogged down restaurant openings. My relationships with sustainable suppliers had reduced the environmental impact of the restoration, earning Victoria's preservation society unexpected recognition from conservation organizations. The opening gala is already oversubscribed, Victoria noted, consulting her immaculately organized portfolio. The Huntingtons are flying in specifically for the event, and 3 national publications have requested exclusive features. What remained unspoken but mutually understood was how completely our professional collaboration had transformed our personal relationship. Victoria would never be the warm, emotionally demonstrative mother-in-law of sitcom fantasies, but she had become something equally valuable, a respectful ally who recognized and valued my expertise in my domain while confidently sharing hers. The Historical Society Board voted unanimously to establish permanent headquarters in the East Wing, she continued as we inspected the private dining rooms. The ongoing presence of preservation advocates alongside your culinary innovation creates exactly the community engagement model we discussed. The community engagement model had emerged during one of our early planning sessions for the Cameron Building restoration, a concept that brought together historical education, culinary innovation, and economic revitalization in a neighborhood that had suffered decades of disinvestment. What had begun as a business arrangement had evolved into a genuine mission shared by 2 women with very different backgrounds, but increasingly aligned values. "Lucia?" Eduardo called from the kitchen area, his excitement evident. The custom wood-fired oven was just delivered. "You need to see this. It's even better than the design specifications." Victoria and I made our way to the kitchen, where the massive artisanal oven formed the centerpiece of our culinary workspace. Crafted from reclaimed brick salvaged during the building's restoration, it represented both heritage preservation and cooking innovation, a physical embodiment of our unlikely alliance. "The thermal efficiency exceeds our projections," Eduardo explained, showing us the temperature readings with evident pride. "We can maintain precise heat control while using 30% less fuel than conventional systems." "Impressive," Victoria acknowledged, displaying the genuine interest in operational details that had surprised me throughout our collaboration. She turned to me with characteristic directness. "This validates our decision to prioritize quality over expedience. In the restoration timeline, the hour in her statement represented significant evolution from the woman who had once dismissed my entire career as merely restaurant work. Through months of collaboration on the Cameron Building project, Victoria had developed genuine respect for the operational complexities of restaurant management, while I had gained appreciation for her meticulous approach to historical preservation. We had discovered common ground in our shared commitment to excellence, whatever the domain. As Eduardo returned to supervising the kitchen installation, Victoria and I continued our inspection of the nearly completed space. The restaurant would open to the public in exactly 1 week, but tomorrow would bring our private pre-opening event, a dinner for family and key supporters who had contributed to making this collaboration possible. "James says your parents arrived safely?" Victoria asked as we reviewed the flow from dining room to exhibition kitchen. "This morning," I confirmed. "They're staying at the hotel through the grand opening. My father's already consulting with Eduardo about incorporating some traditional techniques for the heritage menu section." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Robert suggested we host a family dinner at our home after the pre-opening tomorrow. Something more personal than the public events, if you and James think that would be appropriate." The invitation represented yet another step in Victoria's ongoing effort to establish a functional family relationship, not through grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but through consistent, meaningful actions that demonstrated evolved understanding. The woman who had once relegated me to server status in her home was now explicitly inviting my immigrant parents to dine as honored guests at her table. "I think that would be lovely," I replied, recognizing the significance of her offer. "My parents would appreciate the gesture." Something close to relief flickered across Victoria's features. "Excellent. I've asked our chef to prepare a menu that respects their expertise while showcasing regional specialties. I thought it might create common ground for discussion." This thoughtful consideration, acknowledging my parents' culinary knowledge, while sharing her own regional traditions, exemplified how far Victoria had come in recognizing the value of cultural exchange rather than hierarchical judgment. She hadn't abandoned her appreciation for tradition and protocol, but had expanded her understanding of whose traditions deserved respect. "One more thing before we continue the inspection," Victoria said, retrieving an envelope from her portfolio. "The Historical Society Board approved this unanimously yesterday." I opened the envelope to find formal documentation naming the Cameron Building's central gathering space, the Ramirez Atrium, in recognition of my family's contribution to the Alpha region's culinary heritage. The gesture was both professionally appropriate and personally meaningful, a public acknowledgement of immigrant contribution to community culture that would have been unimaginable from Victoria a year earlier. "This is unexpected," I said, carefully, genuinely moved by the recognition. "It's entirely merited," Victoria replied with characteristic precision. "Your family's preservation of culinary traditions parallels our architectural preservation work, different manifestations of the same essential value, honoring heritage while creating space for innovation." Before I could respond, James arrived. With the lighting designer, his face lighting up at finding his mother and fiancé in comfortable collaboration. Throughout the Cameron Building project, he had watched our relationship evolve with cautious optimism, never pushing for artificial harmony, but consistently supporting the gradual development of mutual respect. "The custom fixtures for the main dining room just arrived," he announced. "They've incorporated elements from both the building's original designs and motifs from traditional Mexican pottery, a perfect visual representation of your partnership." The symbolism wasn't accidental. James had commissioned the lighting, elements specifically to honor both heritage traditions, his mother's dedication to historical preservation, and my family's culinary cultural legacy. Like the restaurant itself, they represented the possibility of creating something new and valuable through the thoughtful integration of different perspectives. As the final preparations continued around us, Victoria excused herself to meet with the historical documentation team, leaving James and me momentarily alone in what would soon be the bustling heart of our flagship restaurant. "A year ago, would you have imagined this partnership?" James asked, gesturing toward the space that embodied our successful collaboration. "Not remotely," I admitted. "The night I left your mother's dinner party, I wasn't sure our relationship would survive, much less evolve into a productive business alliance." James nodded, acknowledging the genuine crisis we had navigated. "Mom's evolved more in the past year than in the previous decade, not through dramatic transformation, but through persistent small adjustments in perspective." "We both have," I corrected gently. "I've gained appreciation for her attention to historical detail and protocol. She's recognized the value in my community-centered approach. We've found complementary strengths rather than competing perspectives." The journey hadn't followed a neat narrative of conflict to resolution. There had been no single dramatic moment of reconciliation, no tearful apology that instantly healed all wounds. Instead, Victoria and I had built respect through consistent actions over months of collaboration, each small interaction gradually reshaping our understanding of each other's value. "The family dinner at our house tomorrow," James said hesitantly. "Mom's been planning it for weeks. She's never been this invested in creating a welcoming environment for your parents." "She's making a genuine effort," I acknowledged. "Not by becoming someone she's not, but by expanding her understanding of what constitutes achievement and tradition. This was the most meaningful evolution in our relationship. Not Victoria attempting to adopt my values or perspectives, but her developing genuine respect for the different path my family had taken toward success and contribution. She hadn't abandoned her appreciation for established protocols and traditions, but had expanded her recognition of which traditions deserved respect. The pre-opening event the following evening exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The Cameron building glowed with renewed vitality as carefully selected guests experienced the space that embodied our vision of heritage preserved through contemporary purpose. Historical society members mingled with culinary innovators. Victoria's social circle engaged with my restaurant industry colleagues. The Huntingtons brought potential investors who recognized the business potential in our model of culturally respectful development. My parents moved through the space with evident pride, my father deep in conversation with Robert Reynolds about traditional cooking techniques, while my mother charmed Victoria's garden club friends with stories about the indigenous ingredients she had introduced to their community decades earlier. "Your mother is quite knowledgeable about native plant cultivation," Victoria remarked, joining me by the exhibition kitchen where Eduardo was demonstrating heritage cooking methods. She's offered several suggestions for the Historical Society's medicinal garden project that our botanist found quite innovative. The observation reflected Victoria's evolved capacity to recognize expertise outside her traditional social framework, to value knowledge gained through cultural tradition, and practical application as highly as formal education or institutional affiliation. She hadn't abandoned her appreciation for credentials and established authority, but had expanded her understanding of how expertise manifests in different contexts. "She'll be thrilled to show you her cultivation techniques," I replied. "Her family has preserved these traditions through generations of disruption and relocation." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "There are parallels to architectural preservation through periods of urban change, different domains, but similar fundamental values of continuity amid transformation. This capacity to recognize underlying connections between our different traditions represented the most meaningful evolution in our relationship, the ability to see complementary values beneath surface differences. As the evening progressed to its conclusion, James called for attention to offer a toast. Standing in the center of the Ramirez atrium, surrounded by family and supporters from both our worlds, he raised his glass with evident emotion. "To the eye, visionaries who saw possibility where others saw only conflict," he began, his gaze moving between Victoria and me. "This space represents more than a successful business venture or preservation project. It demonstrates how seemingly opposing perspectives can create something more valuable together than either could achieve alone." The sentiment captured exactly what the Cameron building restoration had come to represent. Not compromise that diminished both traditions, but creative synthesis that enhanced them through thoughtful integration. Victoria and I had discovered that preservation and innovation weren't opposing values, but complementary approaches to honoring what matters while creating space for growth. "To heritage honored through purpose," Victoria added, raising her glass in a gesture that acknowledged both her preservation values and my culinary innovation. "And to unexpected partnerships that reveal new possibilities," I concluded, completing the toast that symbolized our evolved relationship. After the event concluded and guests departed, our families gathered for a more intimate celebration in the private dining room. Eduardo had prepared a special tasting menu that honored both my family's culinary heritage and Victoria's regional traditions, creating a culinary conversation between different cultural expressions. "Tomorrow's family dinner," Victoria said, as we prepared to leave, addressing my parents directly with uncharacteristic warmth, "will be less formal than tonight's event. An opportunity for more personal connection." My father, always perceptive about underlying intentions, responded with gracious understanding. "Breaking bread together creates bonds that formal events cannot. We look forward to sharing stories, and traditions at your table. The exchange represented everything Victoria and I had worked to build over months of collaboration. Not artificial harmony or pretended similarity, but genuine respect for different expressions of shared values. We had established a foundation for family connection that acknowledged our different backgrounds while creating space for meaningful exchange. The following evening, my parents and I arrived at the Reynolds estate, the same home where Victoria had once introduced me as the help to impress her social circle. The contrast between that humiliating dinner and tonight's thoughtfully planned family gathering could not have been more profound. Victoria greeted us at the door personally, her traditional formality balanced by genuine welcome. "I'm so pleased you could join us," she said, the social pleasantry backed by authentic intention. "Robert and I have been looking forward to a more relaxed opportunity for conversation." The dining room had been arranged with careful attention to creating comfortable exchange rather than formal hierarchy. Family photographs from both lineages were displayed on a side table. The Reynolds family's generational portraits alongside my parents' journey from immigrant entrepreneurs to community pillars. Wine selections included both established European vintages from Victoria's collection and emerging labels from Latino vintners that I had introduced to the regional market. Throughout dinner, Victoria demonstrated the evolution in her perspective that had developed through our months of collaboration. She listened with genuine interest as my father described building his grocery business against significant cultural and economic barriers. She engaged my mother in substantive discussion about traditional ingredient sourcing and preservation techniques. Most significantly, she spoke about her own family history with unprecedented openness, sharing the story of her grandparents' financial collapse and her father's determined rebuilding of family position. "Different paths from different starting points," my father observed thoughtfully, "but similar values of persistence and heritage honored through achievement." Victoria nodded with uncharacteristic emotional openness. "I've come to recognize that more clearly through working with Lucia on the Cameron Building project. Our methods and contexts differ, but the underlying commitment to excellence and continuity shares common ground." This recognition that different cultural expressions could reflect similar fundamental values represented the most meaningful evolution in Victoria's worldview. She hadn't abandoned her appreciation for tradition and established protocols, but had expanded her understanding of whose traditions deserved respect and recognition. As dinner concluded and conversation continued in the living room, Victoria approached me privately with an envelope similar to the one she had presented at the Cameron Building. "The Reynolds Family Foundation Board approved this yesterday," she said, her manner businesslike yet tinged with genuine emotion. "A scholarship program for first-generation culinary students, named in honor of your parents' contribution to our regional food traditions." The initiative represented far more than a philanthropic gesture. It acknowledged immigrant contribution to cultural heritage as worthy of institutional recognition and support, a profound evolution from Victoria's previous dismissal of my background as somehow less significant than established tradition. "This will create meaningful opportunity," I said, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the program. "Not charity, but recognition of potential and value." "Exactly," Victoria agreed, revealing her evolved understanding of empowerment versus patronage. Investment in culinary innovation that honors heritage while creating new expressions. The same fundamental values we've discovered through our collaboration. As the evening drew to a close, Victoria walked us to the door with Robert, their unified presence symbolizing the family connection we had gradually, persistently built through months of intentional interaction. "The Cameron Building opening tomorrow represents more than a business milestone," Victoria said as we prepared to leave. "It demonstrates what becomes possible when we recognize value in different approaches to shared fundamental commitments." The statement captured exactly what our unlikely alliance had achieved, not by erasing differences or pretending similarity, but by discovering the complementary strengths in our distinct perspectives. We had built something neither of us could have created alone, each contributing essential elements to a whole greater than its parts. Standing on the doorstep of the home where I had once been relegated to serving status, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of genuine connection. Victoria Reynolds had not transformed into a different person. She remained formal, tradition-oriented, and deeply invested in established protocols. But she had expanded her understanding of whose traditions deserved respect, whose achievements merited recognition, and how different paths could reflect similar underlying values. And I had evolved as well, developing appreciation for Victoria's meticulous approach to preservation, her commitment to protocol as a form of respect, and her recognition that some traditions persist because they carry genuine value across generations. We had discovered common ground not through compromise that diminished both perspectives, but through expanded understanding that enriched them. As James and I drove home, he reached for my hand with evident emotion. "That dinner was something I couldn't have imagined a year ago," he said. "Not my mother pretending to be someone she's not, but genuinely engaging with your parents as equals, with valuable perspective." The most sustainable transformations happen gradually, I reflected. Not through dramatic gestures or artificial harmony, but through persistent, meaningful shifts in understanding. Our journey from kitchen humiliation to genuine collaboration hadn't followed a neat narrative arc of conflict to immediate resolution. It had unfolded through uncomfortable conversations, pragmatic negotiations, and grudging recognitions that gradually evolved into genuine respect. We had built something valuable not by erasing our differences, but by discovering how different strengths could create something neither could achieve alone. Tomorrow, the Cameron Building would open its doors to the public, a physical embodiment of what becomes possible when preservation and innovation are recognized as complementary rather than competing values. But the more meaningful achievement existed in the transformed relationship between two women who had discovered that different paths could lead to shared fundamental commitments. The mother-in-law who had once made me serve dinner to her friends hadn't known I owned a restaurant chain. But through that humiliating evening, we had begun a journey toward something neither of us could have anticipated. A partnership that honored both our traditions while creating something entirely new. Sometimes being forced to serve is what enables you to truly lead. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.